suddenly. Nobody don't want to work hard again. We send for some workers from them foreign countries. When they rip we off, everybody start to complain. Farmers turn their backs from the land, no agriculture, no farming. They get new money from special works that pay them for doing nothing. The whole place become a big welfare, more pay but no production. We didn't know that the oil money would have done. We spent millions on food alone when we could have grown we old, but we have cash to spend. Why plan when we all can buy? Jet planes to Miami, spending sprees to New York City, and the import bill just rocket to the sky. Electronic games and video, morality went down so low. The big apple reached Trinidad somehow. Well, now that the table turned and it seems as though the money got done, Trinidad have no right to be balling now. They out their sorrow, want to sell out their assets. Texas who also want to sell point of beer. They don't train out the country, they want to run with the money. Oil is no longer lucrative, so they don't care. We already own Train Talk, which we catching with it.
All right, everybody, welcome inside your afternoon drive time exchange. And of course, this is where we look at the issues, especially important issues of the day. Of course, you are locked on to New Era TT Radio. We call it Net Radio. And we are happy to have you in this space at this point in time. Of course, our host is none other than journalist extraordinaire, Mr. Tony Fraser. Tony, good afternoon to you. See if you're muted.
Hello, Charlo. You've crossed me?
Yes, I am. I am here with you right now. Are you hearing me okay?
Sorry, not hearing you.
Okay.
Okay, I just heard you. Is everybody hearing me?
Yes, Tony.
Wonderful, wonderful. We seem to have a little bit of a technical problem, but we will continue until we get everything correct. Afternoon to our listeners, and as Charles said, you're on the afternoon drive, the time and the place where things happen. And we have quite a panel for us this afternoon, and we are going to be discussing that important event which takes place on Monday, all of Monday from 6 to 6, and then the counting starts. The counting, the joy and the sorrow, all happening in one place. My mother used to tell her children when things were going bad, that joy and sorrow live in the same house. So they will live in the same house on Monday, those who are joyful, those who are sorrowful. And we have a lineup. I'm seeing two of them. I'm seeing Clyde Weatherhead. Clyde Weatherhead is one of those persons who has been involved in everything public, trade unionist, politician, attorney, instigator of political fights on the newspapers with his letters to the editor. Clyde, thank you for being here this afternoon, and I'm sure that you will instigate some of those contentions again. My good friends, Derek Ramsamooj, who's another man who likes to instigate things not only in Trinidad but around the Caribbean. His latest fight was in Suriname a couple of years ago when he ran afoul of the government, and the government took some arbitrary action to deal with him. But Derek is a man accustomed to those things. I remember this afternoon, Derek, that you once offended the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who came to your assistance in Suriname. What a thing. Welcome to the program, sir. Derek always blames me for his troubles, but he gets in troubles by himself. And I haven't seen him yet, but surely Dr. B.Ragoonath is supposed to be on the line. Bishnu, are you there? No, he must be getting a little bit of a trouble also. We have another panelist, Denise Demming, who's a regular letter writer to the newspapers. She once worked in the media and she does her own thing now. So, lady and gentlemen, when we get the lady on the line, we want to talk election time this afternoon, looking at the polls, and Derek must have developed his own poll, and he can tell us about that if that is so. What are the expectations? Um, who is likely to be smiling or crying come late Monday evening, perhaps early Tuesday morning? And all of those things. The campaigning, very important. The campaigning of the two major political parties and the smaller parties also, and what seems to be heading for a straight fight, not only in Trinidad but in Tobago. The fight there for or there is expected to be not between the UNC and the PNM, because as we know, the UNC has stopped contesting the two Tobago seats, and this is after getting shut out in previous elections. So let's start. Let me start with Derek. Derek Ramsamooj. What has it been? What has it been looking on this from the sidelines in terms of the campaign? Have the parties in your mind been relevant to the issues at hand? There have been two manifestos, or actually one manifesto and a manifesto of the UNC, which I saw for the first time yesterday, and we discussed a little bit on the program yesterday with a few economists. Your sense of how the campaign has gone so far for the two major parties. Derek Ramsamooj.
Derek, your mic is muted.
Any better now, Tony?
Yeah, go ahead.
I can't understand that. You're hearing me now?
Yes. Are you hearing me, Tony?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Good
Did
afternoon.
you hear my
Tony.
introduction?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Good afternoon, Tony. Good afternoon to all your listeners and viewers. I first must inform the listeners and viewers that it is young Tony Fraser that shaped my career, and I am still bearing that burden from May 1995, when I returned to Trinidad, and he ascribed political analyst to me in May 1995. I have never shaken that burden yet, Tony. I hope you're hearing me.
Yeah, yes, I'm hearing you.
Yes, good.
And I hear you again blaming me for your troubles.
Yes, and throughout the region, it is Tony Fraser that have created this creature that the public comes to get an opinion and get angry when I express an opinion based on Tony Fraser's model of what politics, the truth, and morality should be. So, what is it I am observed over the last couple of weeks? This entire country, called Trinidad and Tobago, like many other Caribbean countries, are defined by the desire of wanting change, political change. However, the electorate seems extremely confused as to what that change is supposed to mean. Whether it's the change of the government, whether it's the change of political leaders, whether it's the change of members of parliament, whether it's the change of satisfying the public needs when it comes to safety, security, economic security, job creation. So we also have witnessed, as you pointed out, the manifesto, the laziness of politicians who are aspiring to get a second term to put together a carefully structured intention of a manifesto of policies and programs. We are facing an economic crisis, whether we wish to admit it, in a post-Trump world, in a world where there are certain sanctions where oil and gas revenues are. We have the politics of populism, where every politician is promising everything to the public, knowing fully well there's a price to be paid via being admitted to the IMF drawdown facilities. So the reality is we've had two types of campaign: an emotional campaign, a song and dance, a carnival type, jump and wave type. And as a result of that, you're also going to have a ground campaign, a transactional campaign, where you're going to have 100 to 500 voters in 3 or 4 constituencies, such as Moruga-Tablan, such as St. Joseph, such as Tobago East, in which transactional politics will dominate the political activity in the next coming 3 to 4 days.
Derek, sorry, before you go on, explain to our listeners what you mean by transactional politics.
I pay you for your vote. I pay you for your vote in the next 48 hours, or I pay you for your vote in contracts, public contracts, a couple months down the road. Let's be clear. No political party on their own in their bank account have the quantum of money required to pay for the media time, to pay for the t-shirts, to pay for the social media purchase. So that money has to be paid by someone. And as you know, there is I believe, a ceiling of how much money can be spent by parties or candidates. We have gone through that roof by perhaps private sector donations. No private sector is investing in your party out of their sheer goodwill. There is a price to be had. And that's the development of our politics at this point in time. And that's what I mean transactional. Because people want change. They want a better quality of life. They want a safer community. They want better healthcare. They want roads that are well paved. There is a price to be had, especially when we are all refusing to pay more taxes. We look at the first world countries that basically say, look at the roads, look at the healthcare. But the population pays more taxes. There is a cost to be had for our development. And that's why I am somewhat disappointed that we have not had the business chambers. We have not had the national stakeholders hold the politicians to account as to how they're going to cost their programs in the next 4 or 5 years. Because if you look at the UK's politics, for example, you have independent economic persons stating where is the money going to come from and who are going to pay for these things. So I'm glad we have our good friend, Mr. Weatherhead, with us, because it's important to understand too the cost the trade unions are going to have to pay for their survival, whether it's that of productivity or where is the government going to get the coffers from for places like Petrotrin, Wassa, TNTech.
Okay, that has been Derek Ramsamooj, political analyst, sorry, pollster and so on. I don't know if he has conducted a poll, but we will come back to that in a moment. Let me, with his, he has made his opening statement. Let me go to Clyde Weatherhead, who cannot, by all stretch of the imagination, blame me for his political hangings. He's been doing that by himself for a long, long time, since at St. Mary's, so you can't blame me for that. Clyde, your opening statement.
Thanks for having me this afternoon, Tony. And no, I can't blame you. I blame 1970. I was 14 years old, and my eyes were open to the question of where does the world go? And certainly where does Trinidad and Tobago go? And I've been involved in that issue ever since. I listened to Derek just now, and when I was invited to this yesterday, I shared on Facebook that I would be on this program this afternoon. And a few people asked me, I said, it's about the issues in the election. And a couple of people said, what issues? Where's the issues? so, so apparently for some of these people, there is no issues. While there are some people screaming from the platforms and from the media houses, the traditional media houses, well, the election should be about issues, but they are about race. Well, first of all, let me say,
Well,
I have been,
that's an issue actually.
yes,
But go
and
ahead.
I have been involved in elections in a real sense since 1976. I was a member of the ULF when I was a student at UE, and the ULF candidate in my constituency where I was born and grew up in Tunapuna was David Abdullah. I was part of the campaign. I was a candidate for Tunapuna for the COP in 2007. I was involved in a recount in 2010 in Arima. I have been involved in organizing for elections on many occasions over the years. And I have said to people, I am seeing the UNC falling into its natural, now established pattern of attacking. There's two campaigns going on from that platform. One is, um, well, the current hit song, as far as I'm concerned, is the top of the chart. When UNC win, everybody win. That's the song of the year. And there's a video of the year from the PNM, which has Kamala saying blah blah blah, and it's very tuneful. those are two creative things that they have done, but they don't answer any question about what the real issues are. The other campaign that UNC is carrying on, and I was very disappointed as an attorney at law to hear Mr. Alaha yesterday engaging in the stupidity of calling on the EBC chief elections officer to declare whether she's a member of a political party. That is the right of every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, but certainly the perception is that a chief elections officer of the EBC should not be openly involved in politics. And she is also a public servant who cannot be supporting any political party openly anywhere as a public officer. So I don't know where they're going with this. Wade Mark was in the papers holding up a poll card that was issued to one dead person out of 1 million voters and saying, well, oh, this is questionable and so on. They went to the CARICOM observers and said to them, here now, we don't trust the EBC. Well, I reminded somebody today, the UNC went to court in 2015. I think it was 4 or 5 election petitions, none of which changed any result of the election. I was involved in that election. I was liaison for the Congress of the People with the EBC, and I was told at 5 o'clock by message from the then chief election officer, I think Mr. Narayan was his name, that they were going to extend the election by an hour. I don't think I was singular. The chief election officer must have told every party that that was going to happen. In the extended hour, Botiwari, who was then a candidate for the UNC in a constituency in central Trinidad, called me and said, listen, we have a problem here. The presiding officer decided he closing the polling station. I immediately called the chief election officer and he had that situation corrected. So I don't think I had any exclusive access to the EBC. All political parties had access. So when the matter came to court, I wrote a lengthy, well, call it legal opinion, which I shared with the UNC, with the whole COP executive, and said, even if the EBC was wrong in deciding to extend the election by 1 hour, the law, the representation of the people act says that when you file an election petition, if the results cannot be affected, then there will be no change. And that is exactly what the court decided. So that was 2015. In 2020, the UNC called for about 4 or 5 recounts. No result change. I was in a recount in 2010 in Arima, and after several hours with a pregnant PNM candidate there under stress, I kept saying to her, Madam, please pack up and go home, relax yourself, because the results were not changing. We were counting box after box and nothing was changing. We have had no successful recount changing an election outcome in a general election since 1962. So the UNC is on this second campaign to try and attack the EBC so that if they lose the election, they will come and say, you see, it rigged and they thief the election for the PNM.
Yeah.
Based on what evidence we don't know.
Kind of a la Trump, right? Trump has said that
Yes.
anytime he loses an election, it's invalid. Some corrupt activity has taken place. Okay,
But
so Clyde has given us a kind of scenario of political behavior in campaigning and so on. I wonder if Dr. Raghunath has joined us because he is the head of the group that is looking at responsible political behavior. Dr. Raghunath, no, he hasn't come in yet, Chalu. Okay, so we continue. I don't know what is wrong, but I saw Denise Demming a moment ago up on camera, and she had some difficulties. But Denise, you are on now?
Yes, I'm on now if you're hearing
Okay.
me.
And so Denise attracted my attention with a letter that she wrote about the absence or the what should I say, the weakness of a female political participation, visual, uh, you know, attention on the political platform and so on. So I decided to ask Denise to come and talk to us and tell us about that particular thing. Of course, you are not restricted to only talking about that issue that has been raised, but let's start with that. Denise Demming, incidentally, a former colleague of mine, we did radio programs. It seems like many, many years ago, we were young and strong then, Denise. I don't know about you, but I'm not so young and strong anymore. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Tony. Talking about at least 40 years ago,
Wow.
you know. But that was a lovely time. That was a time in which I learned quite a lot, you know. And my interest in the women's issues is very clear that just about, I think it's 26% of the parliament are women. When I look at the number of women who graduate from the university, you generally have about 70% of the graduates are women. When you look at the business sector, you do not see very many women as the CEOs or the leaders. You see a number of them as assistant or heads of departments, but they're not the CEOs. When I look, I know that this country has had two women as presidents, but that's another issue because I think in both instances, the presidents, in one instance, the current president is one who I do not think is behaving as a president. I think she's behaving as a party representative. So the issue for me is that women are not given opportunities, enough opportunities. We are not recognized. And when we are given opportunities, there is an expectation that you will simply carry out whatever the instructions are. So really, for me, the issue is a lack of respect for leaders and a lack of opportunity for leaders. And women must be part of it. We are 50% of the population. So we can't be 23% of the parliament. We have to be there. And it's not that we're not competent. We're competent, we're available, but many of us don't just follow instructions.
Denise, some people would argue that perhaps women, even though in majority situations, are not forceful enough, are not brave enough. I remember years ago, Hazel Brown asked me to talk to some women who were going in for local government elections. And I raised an issue with, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I raised an issue with regard to women being bolder, opposing their political leader, and those who would want to put them in a position, put them down in a position. And that was revolutionary talk to the highest. The fear was that she would get kicked out of the political party. I don't need to call the political party. So that some people will make an argument that perhaps women need to be more assertive. And Hazel Brown used to always say, they want we to cook food, Hazel, nobody could say that Hazel was afraid of anybody. They want we to cook food, they want this, tralala, tralala. Your response?
My response, I don't accept that as a response, and maybe it's because the women who I have in my circle are women who will say to you, no, I'm not doing that. And maybe it's because my own experience has been that if I have an opinion and it is supported by evidence, you can't give me an instruction to do otherwise. So I don't accept that women are not strong enough and we just carry out instructions. I think that is a bigger issue that a lot of our political leaders expect everybody else to carry out instructions, as opposed to coming up with, how do we collaborate on this? How do we come up with a solution that is acceptable to all? So that it's not just a woman's issue, it's a leadership issue in our country, that there is an expectation that if I'm the leader, you better do what I say.
Right. Let me hear Clyde Weatherhead on that. Clyde has been involved, as he said a moment ago, with a number of political parties, organizing and promoting and so on and so on. What is your view of the contention of Denise? Not that the contention, not that women should have a place, but rather the contention of male dominance. And as I asserted, that's not my opinion, I'm just throwing it in, that perhaps women are not sufficiently vigorous in defending their positions.
Well, Tony, two things. First of all, this is a male-dominated society. The rise of the women's movement in Trinidad and Tobago had nothing to do with the airy-fairy feminism of the United States. It had to do in 1970 and the 70s with women seeking to assert their right to a point of view and to be able to express that point of view and to have equal rights with men. Um, in recent years, the International Women's Day, for example, has been taken over by the government and away from the NGOs who started organizing that in Trinidad and Tobago. So the women's voice, in a real sense, has been stifled by the politics. Within political parties, there's a lot of male chauvinism. Um, you recall that a certain party, I will call names, the Red Party, used to, their women's league was fondly titled the Fat Ass Brigade. And the notion in most political parties that the women are to cook, run errands, do some campaigning, and so on and so on. So that the
The kitchen
exclusion of
cabinet. Remember the
yes,
kitchen cabinet?
kitchen cabinet, so that the exclusion of women from the parliament begins within the parties.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing is that this last night, my MP, who is of the Red Party, this morning I awoke to see a video of her carrying on in St. James. And she has a big poster up at the Piaco intersection saying she's the beacon of the East. But she's carrying on last night in St. James, denigrating the leader of the opposition, saying she can't even walk on a stage, so she's a threat to democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. FDR, who was the president of the United States for the first years of the war, was wheelchair bound. So what does physical disability have to do with leadership? And for a woman to be saying that about another woman, and the leader of the Women's League of the PNM doing that on a platform, is more shameful.
Yeah. Derek, I don't know if you have anything to add to this discussion on women in politics and women being subjugated in the political firmament, as it were.
Thank you, Tony. To add to the contribution of my two other panelists, I believe that the politics in Trinidad and Tobago, like the rest of the world, is going through an evolutionary process. The Gen Z population, especially the women who belong to the Gen Z population, will think fundamentally different from how my mother would think. And therefore, we are seeing the evolution of politics, not only by age, but by gender. as well.
Yeah.
So, for
So,
example,
sorry, Derek, before you go on, for our listeners, I want you to again define the Gen Z for those people who are not familiar with the term.
so let's say the Gen Z population is that who were born at or around the year 2000 or after, who are roughly between 30 to 25 years old. So if you look to the young women who have qualified and from the university, they have a different thinking. And I think part of it has to do with the dialogue too. We are trapped in an old type of dialogue. You know, we say woman and men. We don't say person anymore. So we now need to put the younger population, the younger person, not the younger woman. Because in the research that we do, the gender, the thinking of the women voters are very fundamental because women voters tend to be the decision makers or the larger influencer, not only in terms of social media, but in terms of traditional thinking. How your grandmother will influence you, how your mother will influence you, how your girlfriend or your wife will influence you. So the level of influence basically has grown or has always been there. It is just, it has been ignored. And part of that is because of the primitive mode of politics that we practice. Part of that also has to be with the historical institution of sexuality in politics. I know many male politicians who use an election period to grow their appeal to female candidates, female voters. We must come to terms with a sense of honesty that not only are the historical behavior where men and women interact in politics, the capacity of sleeping to be close to power, right? The ugliest of men, right? Basically, women would sleep with them for being close to power. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that's all the case. What I'm saying is you have to recognize a change in thinking. So what happened in, for example, the Johnny O'Halloran days of the crisis with Johnny O'Halloran, or even the hearsay and the gossip amongst candidates, male and female candidates, of their sexual preferences. Not just male, female, but basically the gay, lesbian, transvestite type. Um, I call it alphabet. Again, I'm politically incorrect because of you, Tony, but I'm saying that space of understanding our sexuality and the effects of that on our voting behavior is just as important as the color of our skin or our educational background. So all of these things are very, very dynamic. And I want to stress women should not be seen to be given an opportunity or earning an opportunity. It is their human right to create the space and to demand it, right? This is not opportunity given to you. This is opportunity that you must take at this point in time. Because you cannot be talking about a Gen Z population, you cannot be talking about an AI politics when you are caught in this caveman approach to primitive politics. And I hope in 2025 we begin that pathway, because it's not the UN quota that you must ascribe to in terms of, you must by law be given X amount of percentage. No, it must be based on your ability and your desire to carve out that space for yourself. Because the female electorate is perhaps the most significant influencer right across the socio-economic groups.
Okay. Thank you very much, Derek and Denise and Clyde. All right, we want to enter directly now into the campaigning in terms of what have been the relevant matters possibly to influence the electorate in a certain kind of way to perhaps move slightly away from the old business of party fanaticism and, of course, race, being two of the major factors which determine and which have determined elections from time immemorial in this country and elsewhere. What are some of the things that have struck you, Denise, as being capable of getting one party or the other into office through the campaigning process?
The thing that has struck me has nothing to do with development. The thing that struck me is the PNM called the elections. Okay, they called the date. And immediately after they called the date, the UNC came out with a campaign that is absolutely tremendous. You look at the newspapers, they have the bottom of the ad on the newspaper every day. You listen to the song that they have. You mightn't like the UNC, but the song is stimulating. You look at their ads, you look at their meetings, you saw a very different approach. And what amazed me was the PNM announced the election and you weren't ready. So something is wrong with you. So when I look at the two campaigns, what I am seeing is the UNC campaign is a campaign that is well designed, it is well implemented. When I look at the PNM campaign, I'm seeing a campaign that's trying its best. You know, it's I run around the savannah. And just this morning, I looked at a billboard that had the Prime Minister on it. And at the bottom of it, it says, "We're number one." And WE apostrophe RE was in a faded red, and everything else was in a bold red. If you're doing an advertising campaign, you cannot do that. Because when you put that faded, it just goes in the back of my mind. So when I look at the details of the campaigns, I'm just not seeing that the PNM was ready for the elections. And that's my opinion. And it is simply based on what I've seen them put out. Recently, I saw them put out an ad with a green tick in it. And that was a nice idea. It was a tick and a tick in a green, as a green color. But how dare you do that when your campaign speaks to red, white, and black all the time? So what I have seen is the PNM called election, but I don't think they were ready.
Right, go ahead.
Well, let me quickly agree with Denise's point there. Um, the election was called on the back of something else. That is an internal fight for the then Prime Minister to appoint a new Prime Minister and to leave himself as the political leader of the party. So we had the ridiculous situation the other night on the platform that the Prime Minister of the country speaks on the platform and then the political leader speaks after him. Somebody speaks after him. That has not been part of the ethics of our campaigns and our platforms ever since. But the difficulty is that instead of one person, that dual personality is now two people. And they have spent so much time manipulating the situation. I disagree with Philip Alexander that the Constitution does not allow it. The PNM wrote the Constitution, they amended it in 1973, and they know how to manipulate it. And that is what Rowley did. The fact is, it shows that the Constitution itself is deficient. Not the PNM, the Constitution is deficient. The PNM is efficient in exploiting the deficiencies. The party that I was associated with up to 2017, the Congress of the People, contested election in 2007 and 2010 on the basis of championing constitutional reform. And in 2010 to 15, failed to bring about that reform on even the simple basis of saying that I will have the right to fire my MP through the right of recall because of a manipulation of the UNC in fear of Jack Warner becoming something strong in elections, because they then introduced the runoff election issue, which was not part of the whole issue. The question here is that constitution reform has never come up in this discussion, to the extent that nothing is said by the UNC about the Tobago issue, which President Maxwell Richard said was the dark issue in our constitutional arrangements back on the 50th anniversary of independence. The PNM has said very little, except well, we do this and we do that. And I heard Shamfa Kojo with some real outlandish nonsense in Tobago carrying on, um, trying to blame the THA for the for the PNM in a general election and all kind of crazy stuff going on. The PNM thing, in terms of Denise's point, let me put it this way. Did you listen to the Prime Minister, who is not the political leader, on several occasions speaking on the platform of the PNM saying, I went to the Minister of Finance and he ran the numbers several times. And based on his running the numbers, we are doing this and we are doing that. That is corruption. For those of us who think corruption is some airy fairy thing, you are using public money, public uh, apparatus for personal gain or political gain. That is corruption. And the Prime Minister, they need this big 100 and something page thing that they put out and says a manifesto. Every night he ad-libbed part of that on the campaign platform, saying, well, this is what we're going to do. This minister and that minister, I talked to them, and so the government ministers, the cabinet, is deciding the political party strategy and not the other way around. This is the PNM at its worst.
Can
Let
I
me
add
ask-
something, Tony?
Sure, you
I want to
can.
say that out of this 100 and something page manifesto, there were 5 references to women. And when you saw the references, it was nothing about a policy. It was just a reference, just a statement. So to me, again, the manifesto was a waste of time, a waste of money, and I don't know what we can get from it. And I've seen duplication from previous manifestos. You know, so in terms of how this election is going, I am not seeing substance.
With regard to the manifestos, I am sure that the political parties have gone beyond the manifestos in the sense that manifestos probably have no weight at all. People don't read them. There was a point in time when I covered political meetings, party meetings, election meetings. They were used to be waved around in front of the camera, and they looked good and so on. What was inside of them really didn't matter for people. Most of the supporters never read them anyhow. Perhaps this is the natural death of the manifesto. But I want to ask Derek to comment on the campaign and the flavor of the campaign, the color of the campaign, and so on, to find out if, in fact, those things matter in the long run. Whether you start late, whether you start early or not, how you wave your flag, who come up on your platform and who hug you up, who defect from the UNC onto the PNM. I have my own views on that, but you are here to answer the questions. I just pose them. Derek, do they matter?
It does not matter at the end of the day. The reality is symbolism is what is used to create a mobilization towards party A or party B. So you have all the music, song and dance wave theater, emotional theater. You have an emotional conversation having, you have a feel-good factor. We work with the carnival culture mentality. We create messages. To think we've spent decades educating our people, and you bring a campaign down to basically nursery rhyme politics, right? Where 2 lines basically try to influence your thinking process. It does matter, however, when you cannot pay salaries in the coming months. It does matter when you have a liquidity problem, when you're going to have to take the actions of the NAR or the COP at different points in time in restructuring the economy. It does matter when you cannot make the financial commitments. So what you do is you psychologically herd your 300,000 people onto a journey for X number of days until they rent your X as you approach the ballot box. So it's a feeling, it's not a thinking. And I want to go back a bit. If you recall, the, the political party called the DAC, which was then headed by Arthur N.R. Robinson. And the primary rationale for the DAC was autonomy in Tobago and how the autonomy between Trinidad and Tobago was supposed to be managed. Here, that is from the DAC days, that would have been in the early 1970s, 1976 type of period, to now, right, 30, 40 years later, we have not moved. The fundamental issue, as was pointed out by Clyde, is our constitutional reform. So what you have are political parties knowing what the problem is, but choosing to ignore it, pick elements of it to create a momentum, and then dump the elements. We have a situation where we should have had a debate in this country, if for no other reason from the leadership perspective, but the economic perspective. But mainstream media are more concerned about advertising dollars and are politically influenced by the advertising dollars. And I think what we are seeing is also the collapse of certain institutions that are supposed to look after the mainstream interests of the population, not their financial pocket. So one of the things we see in this campaign is everyone is a lot more politically aware of what the issues are, what the political games have been, because we've seen it for decades. The question is, are we at a crossroads now where we are demanding a reform, or we just quite happy to abdicate our responsibility, vote X, get a benefit, and let the state of Trinidad look after its affairs, and you abdicate your sense of responsibility? So this campaign has been that of basically psychologically bribing. Psychologically bribing, giving people a false sense of feel good and a refusal to accept what are the major challenges in the next 18 months with the oil and gas revenue. Diversification has been the prostitute word of economic development. We have heard diversification from the first industrial plan, second industrial plan, third industrial plan. Point Lisa is a product of that. But we've had no.
In fact, Derek, it goes back to Arthur Lewis in the 1930s,
Yes.
Talking about diversification and all of the economists who have followed.
Yes, him, Roy Bess, right? Industrialization by revolution, by invitation. So we've had no shortage of economic thinking. What we've had is a shortage of honesty. The society ourselves refuse to take a sense of responsibility of doing what is needed to fix our country. I'm sorry, Clyde, this is not about you, so please forgive me. The one word missing from trade unions is the word productivity. The one word the society wants to talk about is Singapore. How do you change the societal cultural thinking of wanting first world quality of lives, driving the BMW, the Audis, the Mercedes-Benz, but not willing to have the productivity needed to keep your currency at the space it should be at? Sorry, Tony.
That's okay. That's okay.
Tony,
What you did.
Let me just
hold on, Clyde, before you move to there. Derek raised something that I would love to hear you on, because you are part of the trade. Has been part of the trade union movement for decades, being a trade union leader yourself at one point in time. The trade union movement has moved once again, not for the first time, from one party to the other party, almost like a boll weevil looking for a home. How do you look on your colleagues? And it has nothing to do with the UNC. It has to do with the movement of the trade unions expecting that there will be value in this movement.
Well, Tony, let me say to Derek first of all, no need to apologize. I happened to be in the PSA executive at the time when Gordon Draper was the Minister of Public Administration and public service reform was a big thing. It was the fad. And Kenrick Rennie, as president, and myself as secretary treasurer of the PSA, we sat with the then Minister of Public Administration and with government officials, and etc. And we spoke about productivity. We spoke about, for example, in hospitals, doctors operate in teams, okay? But there is no team measurement of performance. We still on this individual story. So there are many issues of productivity that we discussed in those days, but none of it has been dealt with. We spoke about digitalization of the records, the HR records of the public service. And I'm hearing the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago in 2025. I'm talking about 1992. And in 2025, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago says, re-elect me, put us back in power, and we will digitalize the HR records in the public service. What nonsense we doing? So Tony, on this issue, I was around the trade union movement from 1970. The union I first had relationship with was Transport Union under Joe Young. And trade unions in Trinidad and Tobago, as some of them have issued a statement yesterday saying, have been not apolitical, but away from associating with the party politics and expressing some support for parties. It has become a trend in recent years that Ansel Roger and some of the OWTO characters have convinced themselves that they determine the outcome of elections. And therefore they have shifted from PNM to UNC, now back to UNC to say, we will decide who the party is. I heard Kamla Prasad Bisesa, is it last night or night before, on the platform saying that the outcome of this election will be the settlement of negotiations in the public service. For any trade union to think that an election will settle a negotiation is utter stupidity. It is nonsense. It is against the whole history of the trade union movement. Butler was involved in politics. Butler created a political party. Cipriani before him created that. Then in 1976, you had the ULF. Then you have something called MSJ, which claims it's the same thing, but it's not the same. But other than that, the trade union movement in Trinidad and Tobago has kept far away from the so-called major parties.
But Clyde, sorry, forgive me, but I remember in 1981 when he had Comfort and the creation that led to the creation of Tutor to deal with education. And decades later, the president of Tutor then became a minister of education. Again, Clyde, and I respect what you're saying, and I think it's time we find a way to have some actual activity that take these good intentions into sound economic policy and programs.
Well, that is true, but the fact that you could point to that transition at the time of the creation of Tutor to where the minister came from and the association with the party. The fact is that there's nothing wrong with a trade unionist being in politics.
No, there's
nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with a trade unionist being a minister. Why was ULF created? Hoping to become the government.
Yes.
The question here is that we have to understand that in the public sector, you are dealing with a government which is both the employer and the government. They have two bites of the cherry. So when you are the union dealing with them, as I see my now third or fourth successor in the PSA, which I am increasingly becoming ashamed to say I was the leader of that union because of where it has gone. She is saying on a platform last night that the PNM will send home 5,000 workers from WASA. How did WASA get to be 5,000 employees when in 2014 or thereabouts, the UNC had another VCEP inside of WASA that brought it down to 3,000. When in 1993, on one side of 95, when the PNM was there was a VCEP, And after the PNM left and the UNC came in, there was another VSEP in the 90s on both sides. How can the leader of the PSA think that the UNC is not going to send home workers from WASA?
Yeah. And you know, Clyde, without entering the debate about the trade unions, it seems to me, and I have spoken to and interviewed all of them over the decades, that there is not a recognition, not only in the trade union movement, but in the political environment, that it was the trade union movement which started the whole movement towards political governance in Trinidad and Tobago. And if you go back to the turn of the century with the Trinidad Working Men's Association, that was a political trade union. So this nonsense about trade unions getting involved in politics, but I'm not supposed to get into the
But
debate.
Tony, let me
I just
make
asking
let
the
me
question.
just make this point.
Mhm.
In 2015, 2020, the OWTU and its JTUM, because they have succeeded in splitting the trade union movement after we fought to bring it together under NATOC in 1991. They split it again. And they signed a memorandum of something with the PNM because Jennifer Batiste, a former trade union leader of the PSA, was then a candidate for the PNM. They signed an agreement with the PNM, which is a political party, assuming that when the PNM became the government, they would implement that agreement. Can the OWTU have sued and the JTUM sued the government of Trinidad and Tobago for breaching an agreement which it did not sign? And now they are making this exact same stupid mistake by saying we have an agreement with the UNC. If the UNC becomes the government tomorrow, what are they going to do if the UNC turns around and reneges on all those things they're talking here? What are they going to do? They can't do anything about it.
So we are talking about the elections, which are what we are today, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 4 days away, and we are talking about various aspects of the campaign so far. Let me ask Denise to start off this round, and we are talking with Denise Demming, who is more than a letter writer to the newspapers. She had a special liking at one point in time for taking on the then Prime Minister. This little woman attacking Keith Rowley all the time. I'm surprised that he never responded to her in kind, that he responds to so many people. Denise, you had a kind of charm over him or what? Don't answer
Nope.
that question.
Nope, I didn't. Nope, I didn't. I am very clear, and it's not that I took on Keith Rowley. I took on the issues.
Yeah.
And he
All right.
happened to be the one
Don't,
who led the
oh,
issues, but it
yeah,
wasn't him.
don't be so defensive. I'm provoking you. All right. Yeah. Will the trade union movement make a difference? And we have to be clear, because one element of the trade union movement said a couple of days ago, don't involve us in that a group of trade unions. So that particular branch of the trade union movement, will it make a difference in terms of electoral politics on Monday?
No, it will not. I was part of a movement in 2014 in which Dr. Rowley was, he collaborated a lot with trade unions. And then we had a march where we took a petition to the president. And all the trade unions were involved in that. I was involved in the meetings in which they talked about leadership and what we're going to have and so on. So if there's an example of 2014 in which there was collaboration in the trade unions, and after 9 years, the PNM did not deliver what they agreed to, then I don't see a difference with the UNC. The trade union is trying their best to see which party will help them. But what they're not doing is being very clear on what really are my expectations. And to me, a big expectation is productivity in workers. And this trade union movement does not speak about that as far as I'm concerned. I also recall when I spent 10 years of my life I joined Texaco and I left Petrochin. I remember the trade union there, and the issue was not an issue of productivity. It was simply an issue of money. so that we have to change things. And I really believe that this year, 2025, and this period, the post COVID period, and the complete digitalization of everything in the world, I feel that that is giving us a background, is giving us a place to begin to say, okay, what are we going to do that is different? How are we going to transform our country? And we will not be able to do it unless there is a kind of leadership that speaks to those issues well and tells you these are the expectations. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do in the first year. This is what we're going to do in the first 2 years. If people don't know what your vision is, then nothing else matters. And that's what I keep not seeing in all of our leaders. I am not seeing leaders who tell me, well, this is what I'm going to do. This is my vision. This is my mission. This is strategy. If you don't do that, you are wasting our time. Sorry for
Derek
being...
Ramsamooj.
I
Derek,
want to
two questions.
wanted
Hold
to-
on, two questions. One, will the trade union movement make a difference at the polls? And two, which is a follow-on for that. Let's assume for the moment that the UNC wins. Will the trade union movement be satisfied or be able to win from the government what it wants for workers? Two questions in one.
My answer to both questions is as follows. One, the trade union agenda is not defined and therefore is nebulous and will not be effective in any structured governance. Also, the flip side of the trade unions is the emergence of the economic oligarchs. And in developing the state of Trinidad, the dominance of the economic oligarchs, what people call the 1%ers. And let's be clear, this 1%er conversation is not an ethnic perspective or the color of a skin perspective. The 1% are the people who dominate the economic decision making in this country. And there is a relationship between the business sector and the economic decision makers that are in the political space. And that is what is going to determine how our economy grows or not grow, not the trade unions. And therefore, in the whole divestment package of how you basically reduce the state, because this is what it's going to come down to. In an economic crisis, the state will not be able to manage the demands of money, whether to pay public servants or to provide social services. So the state have got to find a way to reduce their expenses as well as to raise new forms of revenue. And every time we have an economic restructuring in our economic history, and we learn, both of us here, all of us here learn about Ralph Henry and the Caribbean economic problems that we face, you are going to get people with capital buying off pieces of this state. So whether it's the energy sector, whether it's the persons who provide your tickets or provide your passports, all of these elements of state public services will be put out to private sector. So the other question we're going to have to ask, the capital invested in the political campaign, how is that going to be paid back to the owners of that capital? And that is going to go in the form of, when the state decides to get rid of resources, who is going to pick that up at peppercorn rates? And we're not talking about physical real estate of land, right? Or governments, but that of government services, that can be privatized. And I think that's where we're going to be going. It may not be water, it may not be electricity, because those are the politically sensitive things. It may be the lower hanging fruit. So the union itself will have very, very little influence because the owners of the party, not the political leaders, the political leaders have mortgaged their political action and their thinking to the financiers of the campaign. And
so what I hear you saying, Derek, is that there's going to be a clash of capital and labor. Let's assume that the UNC wins, and there are tugs and pulls from everywhere, which is normal for any government. You have the capital pull, you have the labor pull. Who's going to win out in that contest, tug of war?
Capital will trump labor.
Clyde?
Capital will trump labor any day.
Clyde, your response.
Well, let me take a little long view of that and give you an answer. In the 1960s and 70s, I may disagree with Derek.
Sure.
But history has moved. The pendulum has swung another direction. The trade union movement has lost its way. The trade union don't even organize, they don't recruit members. The public service, I hear the prime minister, the Red Army leader saying the yellow people brought in expanded contract employment in the public service. They exploded it. Where do you think it is now? 75% of the people you meet in a ministry are on contract. When I went to the Ministry of Legal Affairs in 2010, I met drivers, telephone operators on contract. When the regulations say that you are to be on contract if there's an absence of a skill in the public service or there's a special project to be carried out. What special project does a driver or telephone operator carry out? The fact is that since the NAR coming up the road since 1980s, there has been a movement by all politicians and political parties to expand contract employment in the public service because that is part of their way of dealing with the service commissions. Since they cannot get a special majority, and I am hoping that on Monday the population remains wise and give nobody a special majority so that they can go because both of them have said they will deal with the service commissions. Let the public servants who remain, the very few, who Rowley calls the gazetted officers, let them understand that their only protection is having an independent organization that appoints them, promotes them, and disciplines them. And if the politicians succeed in getting rid of the commissions, that will be the end of the public service in Trinidad.
So Clyde, what is the values then of your colleagues and that part of the trade union movement, getting in bed once again with a political party? They were in bed with the PNM. Remember in that, what was that, the 91 election or one of those elections in the 90s? They were in bed then with the PNM and they fell out soon thereafter. They've been in bed with the UNC on a couple of occasions and they are once again there. I see that PNM incidentally playing an ad with Ansel Roger talking about the sins of the UNC and how the party treated them, etc., etc. So why does the trade union movement seek to get into some kind of coalition? And I'm not too sure we should call it a coalition. It's more like an association with a political party, hoping to be lucky this time around.
Well, I mentioned Joe Young a while ago, and let me refer to him again. In the days of the ISA, when Joe Young and Tiwu led the fight against the ISA, he characterized what we call collective bargaining, which really I describe as war in a civilized manner, as collective begging. The trade union movement for the last 2.5 decades has refused to organize the workers of this country. They have not been recruiting, they have not been training their branch officers. In fact, in the industrial court, there is no union that is not represented by a lawyer. Whereas in the past, the officers of TU, of OWTU, when I was president of PSA, only PSA officers did matters in the court, except if there was a very complex legal issue and we would use a lawyer. But now every union uses lawyers because they have lost the ability to represent the interests of their members. And that is why they are holding on to politicians and hoping that an election will get them a pay increase. They have lost their way. And unless they get their way back, they will make no difference to the rights of the workers, to their interests, and they will go again. Ansel Roger will make another video like that one the PNM is using, with him saying the sins of the PNM, this wrongs, or the UNC.
All right, so we are talking about the election campaign so far, with some projections into the future as to what is likely to happen on Monday, and who will be crying or who will be losing, or in fact, the possibility of some kind of horse trading after the polls have been counted, the electors, the votes have been counted. And while there cannot be a tie like in the past because of the 41, the odd number, one party cannot surely govern with one seat ahead. And so, therefore, there might be some kind of horse trading going on thereafter the election. And we have with us Clyde Weatherhead, Derek Ramsamooj, and Denise Demming talking about the possibilities going forward. Let me ask Denise, women are braver than men in these kinds of matters. And seeing that Denise's argument goes to the heart of the matter about women in politics and so on, she cannot say it hereafter that Tony Fraser give her a chance to make a prediction before all your men, right? Denise, who's going to win the election? Has she gone? Chalo, has she dropped off?
She's muted.
No, she's muted.
Just
And
now,
Okay.
just now, sorry.
Dr.
Yes.
Dr. Raghunath is there.
Okay. So the question you asked me is, who do I think will win the elections on Monday? I think that the UNC will win the elections, but I think it's going to be a very slim majority. So as you said, there's going to have to be a lot of negotiations, because I have a feeling, I don't have the data because the data isn't really there, that some of those independents, a couple of them might just win. And I certainly believe that Tobago will be a decision-making part of the future. So it's a question of which party will negotiate with the other persons. And in the past, the PNM has said that it does not negotiate. So it's that is why I think
Wins
that,
alone, it loses alone, it goes into opposition or goes into government.
yeah. Well, it has said that in the past, but we don't know if things have transformed.
Yeah.
So, which is why I think that it's not going to be the PNM if they keep that as part of their philosophy, but I think it will become the UNC with somebody else.
Clyde?
Well, Tony, first past the post means that there will be no horse trading. If somebody wins 21 seats in Trinidad, that is it. How many seats did the PNM have for the last 9.5 years? They didn't have a big majority. There was no horse trading. The only possibility is that Tobago may have a seat that is not a PNM. And that, as long as we have the first past the post system and our electoral system remains what it is, Tobago will sit there on the margins, and Mr. Duke will dream of the day when he will be the prime minister because he have 2 seats in Tobago and he'll be the kingmaker. That day is gone. Robinson was the last person who enjoyed the possibility of doing that.
Yeah, and in fact, Duke has said that when he wins the 2 Tobago seats, his party meaning, is that he wants the 4 top offices in the government: the Attorney General, the Prime Minister, of course, himself, the Minister of the Finance, the Ministry of National Security.
Yeah.
Is he dreaming?
Well, he's more than dreaming, because Mr. Duke has lost touch with reality many years ago, and he hasn't gotten it back. The fact is that with 41 seats, 39 in Trinidad, and with the history of the elections, I am not sure who will win on Monday at this point, but whoever wins, they will not have a special majority. And if they get 21 seats, they will be happy to be there, and they will blame the other side like the PNO has done for the last 10 years, blaming the other side for they not achieving anything as the government.
Yeah. Legislative matters cannot get through because the opposition has blocked it all the time. Derek Ramsamooj, open your What's it called? A crystal ball. And
Tony,
let's hear.
Tony, we have Mr. B.Ragoonath joining us in between there too.
Okay. Vishnu, you are there now? Okay, perhaps he's
Yeah.
not got online just yet. Is he there, Charlo?
Yeah, well, I'm seeing him there. I'm seeing his video link, but I'm not seeing his mic links. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if his microphone is not working.
All right.
Message
So,
I'm getting is connecting to audio. So there's a connection problem.
yeah. All right. So we will wait until he gets in fully into the program.
Yeah,
So
he
where
is.
was I? I was
Yeah, he
talking
is.
about.
Connection problem.
Is that Vishnu?
Yes, I am here, Tony.
How are you, my friend?
I was waiting for about 20 minutes now, so I left the thing on.
All right.
All right,
So,
I'm okay.
all right. So,
I
okay,
was
sorry.
listening to your conversation.
Yeah. The man with the real projections. We are at the point of.
Not projections. I'm waiting to hear Derek's projections.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, so sorry. We had Derek on the stand. I forgot that for a moment. Derek, let's go forward with your projections.
So let's deal with the marginal constituency of a 3% difference that is of St. Joseph. That's the tightest of the constituencies at this point in time. Weatherhead has run a very aggressive campaign, and you've also had the incumbent Dayal Singh basically being very defensive, but actually on the ground. The major influencer in that would be Gary Griffith, whether Gary Griffith's party as a leader can get anywhere between 500 and 700 votes. That is extremely difficult at this point in time. So I suspect that particular constituency is very, very marginal. And if I was betting Tony Fraser, one doubles and an apogee, I will say that Weatherhead most likely should win that seat by a very, very narrow margin. But the caveat is whether or not Gary Griffith will pull sufficient UNC votes from that. Moruga Tabla.
And before you go off of St. Joseph, around with St. Joseph, Derek, our listeners must know that the margin the last time out was just over 800 votes. So it's not a big hill to climb in that particular constituency.
Correct. And that's about 3%, a 3%, 4% swing, right? So it's highly possible, because if you basically have a straight two-horse race between UNC and PNM, it would favor the UNC slightly, but anything can happen on election day. Okay. With respect to Moruga Tablan was lost by the PNM at their last polls simply because the candidates selected did not have the kind of connectivity that was needed. Atwater, the PNM candidate, who is an educator from that constituency and a descendant of the American soldiers, there's a higher level of productivity in that space. The fishing port has been developed. The agro-processing port is on, the agro-processing area is on the way. It's a rural community, but connectivity with the constituency is very, very important. Local people from that part of the world will know it as a place where there's the availability of babash, as well as fried pork, as well as basically fish broth on the beach. All intentions seem to suggest that Atwater is slowly clawing back that seat. And if election machinery is done correctly, and if transactional politics is strategically applied, that may be just as marginal as St. Joseph. But let's assume the PNM does not win Moruga, and does not take Moruga from the UNC, and does not win St. Joseph. The PNM then will be down to 21 seats. That now brings the two Tobago seats in the mix. If the PNM holds Tobago East, which they say is the most marginal of the two Tobago seats, and if the PNM can hold both Tobago seats, they can afford to not win Moruga and to lose St. Joseph, but keep government by one seat, 21-20 in favor of the PNM. That is further on the proviso that there is no national swing that will basically make any other seat vulnerable.
What of Derek? What of Tunapuna? It seems as if there is some traction by the big cop, the big police officer, the crime fighter. I think the margin about 2,200 or something. So from the last time, is that a bridge that can be crossed?
I don't believe, while there may be some traction in favor of the UNC, I do not believe sufficient time for mobilization to counter the ground campaign of the Tunapuna candidate. You know, there was a candidate called Chandra Sharma many years ago in Faisabad. And Chandresh operated at a very community level. Every funeral, every wedding, every baptism, every Hindu prayers, Chandresh would be there. It's a very similar model as basically put forward by Mr. Ford of the PNM. So he's very social. So while the UNC may make headway, the elements of perhaps people like Hamlin Jailal and Mr. Amrit, who are hardcore UNC participants, where they help in organization, would indeed be questionable at this point in time. So at this point, I would say Tunapuna and Toko Sandgandi will still be behind the PNM.
Okay.
So you're looking at 21-20 in favor of the PNM.
Yeah. The Ghani polls talked about Tobago. I had thought, in my own assessment, I'm not a pollster, but in my own assessment of the politics, that the PNM would get beaten in Tobago. But when the poll came out and I spoke to some of my old colleagues in Tobago, I used to do a program in the 1980s called Tobago Today for Radio Trinidad. So I had contacts all over the place and so on in Tobago. And people have been telling me is that what is happening in Tobago is that the electorate is looking at the general elections very differently from how it looked at the THA elections. They wanted a homeboy, they got a homeboy, etc., etc. A very Tobagonian-centered kind of campaign. Is that something that can be real? How could an electorate swing so dramatically from the THA elections to a general election?
That has been the political practice with the Tobago electorate. Please do not confuse the Trinidad electorate and the dynamics of the Trinidad electorate to the political thinking of the Tobago electorate. They are poles apart. Historically, we have seen where they're quite happy to have one party control the THA and another party make representation on their behalf in central government. Yes, there may be dissatisfaction, but remember the Tobagonians practice a different methodology when it comes to their thinking.
Okay, we are talking with some people who are attempting to help us make sense of what is going to happen on Monday. And as usual, these are projections made by people who are looking at the politics closely and have historical views of the politics and so on. But I think Dr. Williams used to say is that when the bell ring, all Zanduli find a hole. And on the day itself, it could be very different from all the projections and so on that have been made along the way. Dr. B.Ragoonath, my old colleague, Derek likes to blame me for for setting him up into this political career where he get jail in Suriname, where he was. I am waving to him outside the party headquarters in St. Vincent. And the man ain't responding to me at all because he under some serious pressure and so on. Derek is my partner, so we can talk that kind of stupidness against each other. Dr. Raghunath, what is your sense of, well, seriously, how the campaign has gone for the two major parties and what is likely to come out of the campaign that can impact on polling on Monday?
Well, to begin with, the campaign has gone literally the way it was expected to a large extent. There has, however, been some pickup within the last week or so in terms of participation at rallies and so on, particularly so for the PNM side. And I say particularly so for the PNM side because, for instance, 2 weeks ago, I looked at a PNM meeting that they had in Sawa on the Kwezi, and it was, I mean, poorly attended, bearing in mind that both Barataria Sawa and Arangwe St. Joseph were two marginal constituencies, and they needed to show that that area was being bolstered. So to that extent, when we look at what has happened since 2 weeks ago to what is happening now, we've seen an increase in participation in the PNM meetings and so forth, and that spells good. I mean, that's good for them because for all intents and purposes, had we continued the way it looked in the summer meeting, the PNM would have been literally down and out. In terms of the UNC, on the other hand, the UNC has picked up a greater cross section of the community, whether it is bought and paid for pickup or whether it is a real pickup, we are yet to see. Because, for instance, some people, for instance, have asked me the question, when you looked at the participation of the crowd participation in Tunapuna, for instance, and it's a very mixed crowd compared to what you would have found 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So my question is simply, are they coming there of their own will, or are they being paid? And to a large extent, we know. I mean, I have no doubt about it, that some parties pay people to actually participate in some functions and events. And even walking on evenings and so on, people are being paid. So those are things that we have to be mindful of. In the context of where we go from here, as we go into the weekend, we really have to look and see how the rallies turn out on Saturday. And for instance, whether or not we have the same sort of mass participation on both sides that we are looking for. That, however, all of that, however, has absolute no value on Monday, because on Monday, we know it is how the election machinery of the various candidates and parties work that could bring out their supporters to vote on election day. And that, I think, is the big issue. Derek mentioned, for instance, the Moruga Tableland. And one of the interesting things about the Moruga Tableland, for instance, was what happened in the by-election that they had a year and a half ago. We may know that when they had the first, the local government election in the Moruga seat, it was a tie, wasn't it, Derek?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it was a tie. And then they went into a by-election. And surprisingly enough, in that by-election, the PNM got over 2,000 votes. Bearing in mind that they have never gotten, or no party had ever gotten more than 1,600 votes in a regular election. far less for a by-election where you expect a lower voter turnout. And they got over 2,000 votes. My analysis of that simply was what the PNM had treated that by-election as if it was a general election. And in treating it as a general election, they made sure they pull out every vote that they could have pulled out for that by-election. Hence, they came up with that margin. But the mere fact that they were able to pull out 500 more votes than the UNC could have gotten or had ever gotten in that one electoral district tells us that the margin that they would have won, the UNC would have won the seat with way back in 2020 becomes questionable because it was just over 500 and something votes that they would have won that seat with. So clearly that seat becomes a real battleground seat for this election. I agree with Derek that Mr. Atwater has made tremendous inroads into the community, but I am not writing off the UNC candidate who has been on the ground for a while. And I'm saying that on the basis of the conditions within that Moruga Tableland constituency. Derek had said that the connectivity is not there. But that connectivity goes beyond simply connectivity with the outside community and country, the rest of the country. But even within that constituency, there are deplorable conditions. And yes, the PNM has attempted to make and put in infrastructure, the efficient port, the agro-processing plant, and so on. But that I don't think has won over as many people as the PNM had hoped it would have done. So that becomes a real battleground constituency as we go into the election. I also agree with Derek that the St. Joseph constituency, to me, it is now leaning towards the UNC, away from the PNM. And notwithstanding all that is going on, I mean, as the Council for Responsible Behavior, I keep getting numerous messages and reports of attempts at intimidation, the dismantling of banners and election paraphernalia and all of these things coming out of that constituency. So that constituency too is seen as a battleground constituency. So those are the two constituencies as at this point in time. Now, the PNM has also had its eyes on the Chaguanas East constituency. And that Chaguanas East constituency remains to some extent in play, although I am being told that the UNC is pulling a little bit away in it, but the PNM is still hoping that they could pull back on that Chaguanas East constituency. And we really have to wait and see how that plays out.
Yeah, which is a constituency they won a few elections ago. I'm trying to remember the name of the PNM candidate, Hamid somebody. One
Mustafa Hamid.
Yeah.
Mustafa
Yeah.
Hamid.
Let me give our listeners and viewers an example of what Derek talks about transactional politics, and Bishnu was also talking about people getting little parcels and so on. This one was kind of comical, which I witnessed as a reporter. There was a by-election in the Diego Martins Central constituency some time ago. I think it was the first time that Ken Valley, he got into the parliament through the Senate by Manning and so on. And there was a by-election. Devines, I think, had died in the parliament. And so I was covering in the Cocorit area, that those houses that were built up there. And Carl Hudson Phillips was on the campaign trail. Clive Pantin was the NAR's candidate in that election. And Carl Hudson Phillips had the crowd going. And there were about 5 women who were on the platform with banners and so on and so on. And they were having a whale of a time. And they created a good impression. And then I left that meeting and I went down into the Diego Martin Central meeting. And there before my eyes, the five women were again, this time they had on P&M shirts. So when the meeting finished, I went and I asked them, well, I thought I saw you up at the NAR meeting. And the longest stoops that I have ever heard in my life came from one of them, to the effect, boy, Fraser, you're right, we had to make a living in this place, and we supporting anybody who pay we. So that kind of electioneering goes on in a realistic world that we deal with. So we're talking about the election. We have had um, two projections. They are quite close to each other. I still have a question about Tobago, especially Tobago East. Tobago East has been a stomping ground for the opposition to the PNM over a number of elections, and it seems to me that it will pose another possibility. Let me ask Denise. Denise has gone down the road of the UNC winning, which is fine. Everybody has to make a selection. Um, if there is a close one, with perhaps one of the parties winning or in front by one constituency in Trinidad, what do you think will happen with, and let's assume that the Tobago two seats, or at least one of the seats, is in the hands of the chief secretary, and he has to make a determination on it. Where do you think he will set down his flagship, as it were? Your microphone is off. Your microphone is off.
Sorry, I take it off because I have a dog.
Okay.
Okay, so from what I understand of the question, what do I think will happen in Tobago?
Yeah.
I think that they will support the UNC, but they will not just support the UNC. They will negotiate with the UNC for some things that they're interested in. And depending on if they get that, then that's the kind of support that you will have. But my overall thinking about this election is that no matter who wins, I am not seeing anything that tells me, makes me feel that our country is going to transform the way we're doing things. I think that no matter who wins, if it's UNC or the PNM, we will continue to have the issues that we have. We will continue to have a lack of vision, a lack of strategy, a lack of communication with our people. So it's just more of the same. So I'm not very, very optimistic.
So
Let me
Denise,
ask.
Denise, you've come up with the new hit parade song. When
What?
either of them wins, Trinidad
Nobody.
and Tobago loses.
That was, well,
Let me
that's
ask
my.
the panel, starting with Clyde. Is there value in there being not an outright winner in the election? And by that I mean that no one party streams three, four, five, six seats ahead of the other one. Is there value in one party winning by one seat that can, and why I ask that, can that force the two major political parties to cooperate in some kind of way in the interest of the country?
Nothing will force the two major parties to cooperate in any way. They are trying to distinguish themselves from each other when they both play the same role in relation to that oligarchy that Derek spoke about earlier. They are the gatekeepers of the oligarchy, of the parasitic oligarchy that Pandey described it. The fact is, again, because of the weakness, the utter weakness of the trade union movement, there is no force within the body politic which the trade union movement used to be back in the 70s and 80s that is capable of pushing the political parties in any direction. The fact that no party gets a special majority would be most useful to prevent them both from pursuing their assault on the service commissions and other things that they need a special majority for. I don't think they will cooperate in any way because their interest is not the safety and security of the citizens, the economic transformation of Trinidad and Tobago, or even dealing with the crisis in a way that is useful. Um, The fact is, we've spent the last 10 years in that kind of situation and we've gone nowhere.
Mhm. I have identified two major issues. Well, there are three. Constitutional reform, which is really outside of any possibility. All of the parties have talked about it for decades and have done nothing about it. Remember the constitution reform put on by the NAR government in the late 80s when Mr. Robinson couldn't get rid of, what's his name, from one of the commissions, and he set up the higher tally commission, and they reported and nothing was heard of it after, and every political party has talked about constitutional reform. So that for me is a kind of dead issue in the foreseeable future. But we're talking about the two other major issues. One, the crime in the country, which is down in the sinews of the country, and economic transformation, which the political parties don't seem to understand. I had some economists from the EDAB, remember the EDAB with Ronald Ramkissoon and Terry Farrell and so on. And I raised the issue as to whether or not the government was serious about it in the first instance. Ronald Ramkissoon is a good diplomat, and he didn't want to scream, but he did say, in fact, that perhaps in the next generations that will come forward. I'm saying all of this to ask the question whether any of the political parties um, can deal with these two major issues and make that judgment on the basis of what they have said and how they have operated on the campaign during the last, how many weeks, 4 weeks or 3 weeks or however long it has been. Clyde,
Well,
you're on the camera.
well, on those two issues, what have they said? The UNC's manifesto says we will give you legislation that you could kill people who come in your house, and we'll give you guns to kill them. What has the PNM said? We will have a new flying squad. We will call it a different name. It's not SORT, it's not SORT as Griffith had, or SAUTT as before, but we'll have a new name. But same old flying squad concept. So neither of them have put forward any solution to the crime issue. On the issue of transformation, the PNM have said, well, listen, look what we did for the last 10 years. We tried to get more gas. We ain't put all the eggs in the dragon basket, but we have all the eggs in the natural gas basket anyway. So they have not said anything different or new, nor has the UNC said anything about the transformation of the economy. The one thing they said is, David Lee said, well, Trump could talk to we, they wouldn't talk to the PNM. So that is not a policy, that is not a program, that is nothing about transforming the economy of Trinidad and Tobago.
Mhm.
So neither of them is going to do anything real in that direction.
Derek?
I want to push that conversation a little further. So we have an election and we have a new government from next Monday by a 1 seat or 2 seat. The economic crisis with the energy sector still continues. The calamities and the murder rate and crime rate still continues. The expectation of the electorate, if the UNC should win or the PNM, will not be able to be materialized because there's no money available. So we have the trade unions, we have the failures of expectation now emerging, and we perhaps may have an election in the next 18 months. A lot of people will say that the PNM have managed the government with a 1 seat, 2 seat, and will have that capacity. But the economic crisis we face will perhaps serve as a catalyst to what you're talking about, Tony, where we begin to look at the transformation of the society. The question we have is we not having the political will. We have had no shortage of white papers, green papers, academia put down, economic reform, local government reform. But we have a shortage of political will for the execution of it. And I don't just blame the politicians. I blame the stakeholders in the society of allowing poor government, poor government, bad governance to continue. So, to address your issues, the country must face a further level of crisis because political change only occurs when you have a crisis that you cannot fix.
Denise?
Ah, I do a while running thing, and I did a 1 minute while running saying, congratulations to whoever wins the election, and that when they win, they need to collaborate in order to come up with a crime plan. But crime is not just about guns, drugs, and ammunition. It is about people who have to pay bribery. It is about people who break criminals who break traffic lights, and a whole list of things. And that if that does not happen, then the people must protest against it. So my bottom line on it is that people, our citizens, have to protest the things that are killing us. And no matter who wins, that's what we have to do.
Yeah, I am sure that Sir Charles is lining up one great calypso to end the program with. Chalo has a whole slate of calypsos there, and I'm sure that he's going to pick a relevant one. Yesterday, we wound up the program with Stalin saying that he ain't want no politician for friend, and he is tralala, tralala, tralala. We ain't going into that now. Dr. B.Ragoonath, the question of the parties, any of the parties, or perhaps to get ridiculous, all of them put together to deal with the two of the major problems in the country.
One, in fact, while there's the need for us to collaborate, I don't see any of the political parties looking for any sort of collaboration outside of their own party base. And to that extent, the policies that they have articulated, or the manifesto promises that they have articulated, they are going to attempt to deliver on what they can deliver, assuming that they have the money. But with regard to crime, for instance, and with regard to the economic crisis that we face, clearly, whoever takes government has to come up with a diversification plan. We have to move away from this, putting all our eggs in the energy basket. We have to move away from that. And to that extent, for instance, whether we have to go back into agriculture, whether we have to push some other thing other than light manufacturing or something else, we have to get into something else. The notion, for instance, of talking about tourism in Tobago and sandals and all of those things, that's not now. That's 5 years down the road. What are we going to be doing in the immediate short term and short and medium term? And that is where, for instance, whoever forms the government, we will need to probably push. The first thing we have to push for is food security, at least some level of food security, whether it's going back into agriculture, whether it's trying to facilitate food production one way or the other, from either from the sea or from the land. We have to do that.
All right.
There is no other option.
Well, thank you very much, Denise Demming, Dr. B.Ragoonath, Derek Ramsamooj, my accuser, Clyde Weatherhead. And you won't hear Bishnu, but he accuses me of him getting in jail in Suriname and other places, and so on and so on and so on. Chalo, well, just our listeners, Monday is a special day. It's not a day that we could be talking about politics during the day while the election is going on. So we will keep silent on Monday. And of course, when the results are announced, I am sure that we will be on the morning program, the breakfast show, talking about it, and in the evening talking about the outcome and what is going on, who will trade with what, etc., etc., etc. So, Chalo, over to you. And just let me announce to and Chalo will be very happy with this, to our guests, that we're in the business of looking for sponsorship. We've just started and so on. And people like Derek with his big pile, with his big pile, could take out some ads for his, and so on and so on. But seriously, we're just starting. And of course, advertising is the lifeblood of any institution like a radio station, like a media house. So if you know anybody who wants to advertise on a significant station, talk to Chalo, right?
Yes,
Chalo,
definitely, Tony.
music time.
All right, thank you very much, people. Thank you very much for being on the Drive Time Exchange with Tony Freeze and, of course, all his guests today.